We're here today with Dr. Paul Lyrene, University of Florida Emeritus Professor of Horticultural Sciences. My name is Brian Pearson, and this is the ASHS HortLegend series, where we get to interview some amazing scientists, rock stars of our field. So I want to start by thanking you, Paul, for being here and being willing to share some insights, perspective, and some wisdom and guidance for folks in the society.
Happy to be here. It's a big assignment. I don't know if I meet
Uh,
all your qualifications. We'll see.
Oh, I am fully confident, fully confident. We'll go ahead and start with question one. What is your horticultural specialization, and what are the primary positions you have held?
Yeah, I got my PhD in the agronomy department from the University of Wisconsin in 1974. And the crop I worked on was oats. And so my first job was in a agronomy position. And when I got out of graduate school, I applied for various different jobs and wanted to come south because I was raised on a farm in South Alabama. I really liked the heat in the summer and the hurricanes and all that kind of stuff. So I took a job breeding sugarcane in Belle Glade, Florida, uh, which is in South Florida. And the sugarcane industry has been for a long time a pretty important industry in Florida. So I bred sugarcane for 3 years, and one day there appeared on the bullet. This was in the USDA lab, but I was a state employee. Uh, and one day there appeared on the bulletin board an announcement for a blueberry breeding job in Gainesville. And Belle Glade was where I more or less lived when I was in the sugarcane breeding business. It was a beautiful place, but it was also fairly socially remote for a young person. And I also wanted to try my hand at teaching. And so I thought that'd be a great job to have at the university up on the main campus. Um, so I applied for the job, and fortunately, the one of my colleagues at the experiment station in Canal Point, actually where the USDA sugarcane breeding station was, um, had a close friend who was in the horticulture department on campus, who actually had posted the job. And he gave me a good recommendation. So I came up and started breeding blueberries and teaching perennial plant breeding. Um, so that's how I got into the business. Actually, the job was breeding blueberries, and I didn't know I had picked a lot of wild blueberries in South Alabama when I was a kid. And when I got to up to the take the job, I found out that the blueberry I was going to breed was not the same species as the one I thought I was going to breed. So it took me a while to learn about blueberries. That was the interesting thing. Sugarcane and blueberries are in some ways very much alike. They're both clonally propagated and they're highly heterozygous. They're high polyploidy. So one's a grass, of course, and one is a ericaceous plant. But they are, in terms of how you breed the things, they're very, very similar. And about half of what I know about blueberry breeding, I learned on the farm when I was a kid, and the other half I learned when I was breeding sugarcane.
Well, as someone who I guess lived in Florida for 32 years and UF being my alma mater, seeing what the blueberry industry is today, I am selfishly glad you made that move from Belglade to Gainesville and took your interest and skills and applied it because the impact has been substantial from witnessing it myself. Uh, Question two, what has horticulture meant to your life and career?
Well, my whole life has been my adult life, my working life has been tied up with the blueberry breeding project, and I've been very interested in it, very devoted to it, and very rewarded by it. So many of my close friends are people I met through the blueberries. So it's been very important.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, it's one of the great things, I guess, about the careers that we pick, the colleagues that we meet, and the lifelong friends that you make. in our areas of discipline, and it's incredibly rewarding. I think when I look back, and very similar to the story and the way that you have seen it. So thank you. Um, kind of related. What do you consider to be the most rewarding part of your career in horticulture?
Well, I guess as a plant breeder, the most interesting and rewarding thing has been the plants themselves and the fact that what I learned in graduate school about how to breed things actually works when you apply it. And one of the things that I found very interesting when I came to breed blueberries and I looked at the history of the last like 50 years of blueberry breeding, I found that the intergenerational time of blueberry breeding was like 20 years between the time you made a cross and when you used the progeny as parents in crosses. Whereas coming from the small grains breeding, they either did one generation cycle a year or two, depending on whether you had two different breeding sites. You really, in breeding, only make progress when you're changing generations. And this process called uh, recurrent selection, which is the only thing I ever used in my breeding project, um, has been around. Well, nature invented it, I guess. That's how evolution happens. But certainly when Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, his first whole chapter, first about the third of the book, was recounting the progress plant breeders had made in the previous 100 years before he wrote the book. He wrote the book, I think it came out about 1860 or so. And so he's talking about plant breeding methods that were been used for back in the 1700s and 1800s. And the methods are not that much different. The ones I use are basically you read The Origin of Species, you got all the information you need to know about breeding blueberries. But anyhow, the I guess the one of the things that was very rewarding was um, to see when in the blueberry breeding and breeding many clonally propagated crops like strawberries and stuff, you grow tens of thousands of seedlings from selected parents. The parents are heterozygous, so the F1 populations are segregating. They're really F2 populations in a way. So you grow 10,000 seedlings and no two of them are alike. It's like mining diamonds in a diamond mine. You find big ones and little ones and flawed ones and red ones and green ones. And it's like very exciting to see those plants. But in the process of picking out, if you have 10,000 blueberry plants, all seedlings, which one is going to be a successful cultivar? There's a procedure for doing that, which we call like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. You can't look at 10,000 seedlings and say that one over there is the cultivar, the other 9,199 I'll throw away. So what you do is you first pick out the best 10% when they first fruit. Then you grow those 10% for a while. You pick out the best 10% of those. And then you put them in bigger plots, bigger tests, more locations. You pick out, and these are all clonally propagated, so it's the same plants as you go up. It's kind of like a elimination contest. You first have to win your city wrestling match, and then you go to your county match, and then you go to your state match, and you go to your national match, and you get in the World Olympics, right? That's how the blueberries things. But there have been a few times in my looking at raw seedlings when they first fruited that I found a plant I was very excited about. And I said, that is going to be a cultivar someday without going all the way through that 20 years of testing to find out. And was pretty amazing. When I saw a plant, I said, man, that thing, that's what I'm looking for. And it turned out sometimes to be right, that after many, many years of testing, they turned out to have some unusual feature that turned into major varieties. And then I guess when I started, blueberries are a very new crop. And so when I started, the industry was worldwide, was pretty much confined to the United States and a little counter seasonal production in Chile from the other hemisphere. And so the world acreage of blueberries was small and the world production was small. So it was a crop that has a lot of natural potential that had not really, it was like a rising star, I would say. So it was a very easy crop to make progress with. And that was very gratifying. I guess in terms of what was satisfying about the in- the what was satisfying about the career was meeting all the different people involved in the blueberry industry. And like when I first came to Florida, the germplasm we used or had been used to start the blueberries that were adapted to Florida consisted of varieties developed in Michigan and New Jersey. And then they had been crossed with wild things from Florida to try to get adaptation. And so there was lots of problems with the things. There were all kinds of diseases we had in Florida because the plants are native here. There's like 8 species of blueberries in the woods in Florida, and they're abundant. So there's a long list of diseases and insects and stuff that are waiting to jump on the plants. And so things that cultivars that were successful in the north would fail when planted in Florida. So when I first started, well, we released first high bush cultivars, which is mainly what I bred during my career, had been released a couple of years before I came. And growers planted them as pick your own varieties because they were the main industry in Florida at the time was like 1,000 acres of pick your own rabbit eye blueberry varieties. The rabbit eyes are pretty well adapted in Florida, and growers wanted to plant these high bush because the university was like, these are wonderful new things. They ripen a month earlier. But when they planted them, within 5 or 6 years, they found out two things. Number one is instead of selling them for 50 cents a pound, they could get $5 a pound for them. And instead of yielding, the other thing they found out is instead of yielding 20,000 pounds an acre, they yielded 500 pounds an acre. And instead of living for 20 years, they lived for like 3 growing seasons and they died. So it was an exciting thing. The market was there. It was wonderful. We had the only blueberries on the market for a month every year. It was phenomenal. In terms of today's value, those growers were getting like 20 times what they had been getting for what they've been growing before, but they couldn't grow the things. So the big challenge for all of us, the growers and the university, was to try to figure out how to get some yield and longevity out of these blueberry plants. And that threw me into contact with a lot of plant pathologists and entomologists and anybody, soils people. And we had the irrigation water in Florida has a pH of about 7.2. Blueberries have to have very acid soil. And the bicarbonates in the water are very high. Calcium carbonate, like Florida, the water that we pump out of the Florida is living in lime rocks for the last 20,000 years. So you pump it up and you drive your truck under it one time for 1 minute and you can't see out of your windshield anymore after it dries because it's like coated with lime. And so the blueberries didn't like that at all. So, and then the market for Florida blueberries, the high price market was early. So the growers they said, I don't care if it yields only half as much, I want it to be a week earlier ripening. Growers told me that, and sure enough, it was like, can you get $10 a pound for them in May and $5 a pound on $10 a pound, say the last week of April, $5 a pound the first week in May, like $2 a pound the second week in May, and $1 a pound. And it cost you like $1 to pick, pack, and chip back in those days. So there's nothing left if you're not having early market. So anyway, we made great progress breeding for earliness, but a big part of that was making them flower earlier. So when they flower earlier, then we have freezes. They flower like in January. We have freezes in our blueberry growing area all through February and March. So I learned a lot about freeze protection from the weather people. Also, just like a whole lot of different, it was like we had to learn how to grow the crop. So it was the breeder was the person that had to figure out how to make your varieties live. So I forgot the question. By
No,
rapid,
it was a great answer and about the most rewarding part. And it seemed to really hone around the people, the confluence of different demands and meeting them and just having that sharing of knowledge. And so much information has to go in for the decision. I've worked alongside breeders, never jealous of what they're doing, but just always amazed at all the different people that are involved. And I think you articulated the situation in Florida very well between frost that'll happen in the first part of the year, immense disease and insect pressures relative to drier states, in other parts of the country, and the way that supply and demand works, particularly in those windows that you're trying to catch. Sounds like this is an amazing and exciting experience.
the other thing I learned about was birds, because the cedar waxwing uh, migrates down to Florida during the winter and eats all the holly berries. And then when those are gone, it eats mistletoes, berries, which are up in the oak trees. And then it didn't, they tended to migrate out of Florida, amazingly accurate every year on May 20. And that was about when the high-priced blueberries stopped getting ripe. So the growers who first planted them would their entire 5 acres would be eaten by birds. So they had to resort to netting. And they tried, there was all kinds of people selling anti-bird things you could spray on. Welch's grape juice was supposed to repel bluebirds, uh, birds, but it didn't really work that well. And so eventually, the growers discovered that if you plant like 100 acres of blueberries that yield well, you can get about half of them and the birds will eat the other half. If you plant 200 acres, you get like a full crop and a half a crop. So you had to be a big farm. That was the ultimate solution to the bird problem, just grow a lot of blueberries. So we had bird experts of all types, with like falcons and stuff that were trained to hunt things. And so there's a lot that we learned about blueberries that were very interesting.
Sounds like quite the diverse experience and education, learning how to repel birds as a breeder. But yeah, those are the fun, unexpected. Well, maybe I should reclassify that unseen, sometimes unfun experiences that happen in research. Uh, Question 4: how long have you been a member of ASHS, and how has the society influenced your career?
Well, of course, when I was working on with sugarcane, I was an agronomist. So I was in the agronomy society, whatever that thing's, I've forgotten the name of it now, but it's the field crop analog to the horticultural crops. And that, as an aside, that's always been a frustration throughout my whole career, was that the plant breeders were divided into these different departments. So we were a minority in the horticulture department, we were a minority in the agronomy department, we were a minority in the forestry department. And so we had no political power. So whenever a new hire came along, whenever a plant breeder retired, we were often replaced by non-plant breeders, because we were always like the fewest voting people. But anyway, I joined when I started working on blueberries. I joined the Hort Society. That would have been in 1977. And how has it been important? Well, I used to go always to the national meetings. I met a lot of people there. I published almost everything I ever published was in Hort Science, or the agronomy or the horticulture journal. So it was, and it kept things going. The society was very important. I'm not a very society type person where I go out and look for jobs in societies, but it was very supportive of my career.
Fantastic. Excellent. What advice can you offer to students or young professionals in horticulture?
Well, I'm afraid to give advice to anybody other than a young plant breeder, because horticulture is such a diverse field and I hate to give advice about things I don't know anything about. not that I know a lot about different horticulture things, but I don't know what it's like to be a plant physiologist in a hort department or a disease expert in a hort department or an extension person. I did some teaching during my career, but I was never satisfied with my teaching. I never quite figured out how to do it. It was like my lectures were, I think the students were a little bit bored by them because uh, it was very much like I was trying to tell them all that I knew about a subject. And I think that what makes a good teacher is a person that can tell stories well, and I can't really tell stories that well. And then people that are like who are very keen on who understand other people well. And I'm not like a sociologist type person, and I can't read body language and things like that. I understand plants a lot better than people. And I think to be a really good teacher, you need to be really much a people person. And I like people, but I don't understand them very well. Not that I'm claiming to understand blueberry plants, but I understand them better. So now repeat the question, please.
What advice can you offer to students or young professionals in horticulture?
Yeah. Well, if you're into the research aspect, and I guess I can speak about research because plant breeding is a kind of research. Um, I would say ask interesting questions. And a lot of students who have dissertation topics that are given to them by their major advisor, or I don't know how they develop them, the questions that are asked are not very interesting. At least I can't see why they were very interesting. Either the questions are asked before and more or less answered, or the question you can guess the answer to it, or if you knew the answer, it wouldn't change anything very much. So I think to the extent that you're a young researcher, try to figure out some interesting questions, the answers to which are not already known, and which, if you find out what they are, there'll be new information and it'll be surprising, and somebody will care about the results. That's one thing. One other thing I found interesting during my research career was I like to try a lot of tiny little experiments and maybe like 10 or 20 new things every year. And then most of them would be dead ends, or they would very shortly, I would find out this is going to be really, really hard to get the answer to it, or else it's not what I had thought might be an exciting result turned out to be a boring result. And so cast your net widely, but don't keep every fish that goes into the net, is what I would say. Um, if you're working on a crop in a horticultural context, learn everything you can about the crop. And that involves two things. One would be reading everything you can about anything that ever been written about that crop ever before in the history of writing. The other one would be to pick out crops that are analogous to yours and see what's been written about those crops. And surprisingly, in plant breeding, genetically the crops often fall into categories. Like there's self-pollinating crops. There's crops that are in which the final product is cloned rather than grown by seed, and so that there's a lot of things similar about that kind of crop. With blueberries, the closest analogy to blueberries would be alfalfa and Solanum tuberosum, the Irish potato. And the reason they're similar is that they're both all of them are autotetraploids, which is a certain type of breeding behavior that they have, and they've all got the genus in which they reside has a polyploid series. So there's wild diploid plants and there's wild tetraploids and often wild hexaploids. And there's certain rules about the evolution of these ploidy series and about what that means about how you breed your crop. So in trying to learn, well, when I was at Wisconsin, I took a course from the potato breeder there, Stan Peliquin. He was famous back in the 60s as like the world's most famous potato breeder. And he taught a cytogenetics class. And darn if that's not like he was lecturing about blueberries, because it's like exactly the same rules apply to blueberry breeding. So that would be another thing I would recommend is to read about your crop and analogous crops. And then you need to be pretty much, you really need to know how to grow your crop. If you can't grow your crop, and like in a plant breeder, if you've got like, you got an experiment on, or anybody working on blueberries, for example, you got an experiment on, say, drought tolerance or fertilizers or diseases, and you actually you order your blueberry plants from a nursery and they turn out to be mixed two different things in this two different clones in the same plot, or they're the wrong variety, or you can't grow them right because you don't know how to grow a blueberry plant. It's like you can't do good research that way. You got to be able to grow your plant, and I think that's a failure of a lot of people uh, doing things with plants. They don't know how to grow the plant very well. Other advice, uh, I would say there's a big problem now in science, but it kind of first surfaced in psychology research that like 80% of the papers couldn't be repeated. The results from the papers couldn't be repeated. Somebody else tried it exactly the same way and it turned out different. Listening to Beethoven didn't make your baby smarter. After all, nobody else could make it happen except that first person that did it. And so try in every way to figure out how to make your results repeatable. And there's a lot of little things in which the devil's in the details. If you do it this way, it's slightly different, it's not going to work. And so be very careful about saying, oh, this spray does not help blueberries, flowers, set, fruit, parthenocarpically. That's what was found out. But some grower found out 10 years later that it does work. You just got to spray it at different concentrations, different times, different this. And so make your results repeatable. And I remember when I first came, there was a study to see how long could you put a potted blueberry plant underwater before it died. And one person did the experiment, and the answer was they can live for a week underwater and then they'll all die. Another person did the same experiment, same variety, and they lived for like 2 months underwater without dying. And the difference was there Phytophthora spores in the medium or not? So uh, be careful about the details of your experiments, and then take it, listen to everybody's advice, but don't take it all. Like back when there were some big blueberry plantings made in Florida back in the, I guess in the 70s, the early 80s. Some people that had other businesses thought farming was easy, so they came and planted like 200 acres of blueberries, and after 10 years, they'd lost $10 million. And of course, they blamed it on the blueberry varieties and on the breeder and the university for encouraging them to plant this stuff. And uh, let's see, I was going somewhere with this, but I can't remember it now exactly where it's like, uh, it's kind of the idea here is that you really need to understand your plant. And and the growers that these big producers were failing, they would ask like 10 different people, what's wrong with my blueberry plants? Why am I not getting into yield? So the bee people said, well, you're not getting good pollination. And the disease man said, oh, you've got flower thrips killing all your flowers. And then the breeder says, well, these things require cross-pollination. You've only got one variety in the field. And the soils person said, oh, you've got high pH water and your plants are not growing right. So the the guys that finally succeeded with blueberries in Florida were people who were really smart farmers. They had grown peanuts before, they had grown watermelons before, and they knew that farming was not that simple. There was a lot of details to it. And so the advice would be that listen to everybody that's got an opinion about something, listen to it, but test it out to see if it works for you, because it might. You got to distinguish between good advice and bad advice. And sometimes advice is good here and not good there. So what advice otherwise? Uh, just try to enjoy your life, and like in breeding, you have like a long term. You say, man, in 30 years, I can have these blueberries doing something amazing. But in 30 years from later, you say, well, the horizon keeps receding. That is, things like we've got the blueberries twice as big as they were 10 years ago, but now we can make them twice as big again. So there's like, it's always frustrating that that the scene is opening up ahead of you and you're never going to reach it. And so you got to enjoy each little benchmark as you go along. Try to enjoy that. That's some advice. So I'm very much into this mindfulness theory where you got to enjoy looking out the window as you drive to work, or listening to the classical music on the radio as you drive to work, or looking at the other drivers when you're waiting for the red light to change, or looking at the clouds, see which way the clouds are moving while you're waiting for the red light to change. You got to enjoy each little minute of your life because there's nothing to life but a whole bunch of minutes. And it's not like the end of the road is the happy where you're going to reach happiness when you retire, then you're going to go fishing and play golf. But yeah, it's better to enjoy each minute. That would be my advice.
That's some great advice. Thank you for sharing that, Paul. I couldn't agree more that it's so easy to get into the trap of the next grant, the next project. I often joke that there is no such thing, and I think I've copied this, borrowed this from statisticians as the perfect data set. There's always something I could look back and wish I did a little bit different in the experiments. And it's easy to fall into that trap of wanting to be a perfectionist, but failing to see all the amazing things and the amazing data and some of the lives that you've impacted. I think reflect about the students and the postdocs that I've worked with and trained, and some of the amazing discoveries that we're able to identify as things that are really long-term positive impacts that make the science fun and make it enjoyable. We're down to our last question. What excites you most about the future of the horticultural industry and profession?
Well, I added another question to the end of yours. What scares me most about the future? So that would be question number 7. But to get to number 6 first, what excites me most is, well, there's a whole bunch of different things. One is I think there's a great future for flavors. Being a person that worked with a crop in which flavor is an important thing, and blueberries usually think if they're sweet and if they have a good acid sugar ratio, and if they're firm, have a good texture, then that's about all you can ask for. But it turns out, if you think about it, raspberries have a flavor that no other fruit I've ever tasted tastes like a raspberry. And blackberries are sort of that way too. And blueberries have a flavor different than any other. And peaches don't taste like blueberries, and apples don't taste like anything. And what are the reasons for what are the chemicals that are making these different things? And there's been a fair amount of research here in Florida by the food science department and by the breeder that replaced me when I retired about what makes a blueberry taste unusual. And in blueberries, they have come up with a few things, and I'm not sure that they totally understand because you run the blueberry volatiles through a machine, and it gives you all these different peaks. But identifying exactly which peak is making this flavor is not that easy to do sometimes. But in blueberries, years ago, I was using this wild species called Vaccinium eliadii in my breeding because it had the shortest bloom to ripe period of any blueberry, and I wanted to get that feature into the hybrid blueberry that we were growing. And it turns out that species has some interesting flavor things to it. And after quite a lot of years, we Dave Brazelton was down visiting. He said, "This blueberry tastes different than I've ever tasted before." And so I hadn't really noticed much. I was more interested in the fact that it ripened like 10 days earlier than anything I'd ever seen before. But then I tasted it, sure enough, it had an unusual flavor. And that variety became what we call snow chaser, and it became a major success in certain parts of the world. And one producer in Spain grew it, planted it like a lot of it in Morocco, and sold it in Norway. And the Norwegians would only buy from him because it was the only that one cultivar was the only one that tasted that way, like a wild blueberry. But there's a lot, and then there's a blueberry that Fall Creek calls peachy blue, uh, and that thing tastes like a peach. I spent like I don't usually buy blueberries from the store because I can get them free, but I paid like $10 for a little tiny punnet of the things to see, and sure enough, they tasted like peaches. And so the flavors, the people that grow coffee and roast coffee and ferment coffee, and then people that make craft beers, and all these wine people from France, they've got all these different flavors. There's an unlimited amount of flavors yet to be exploited. And in terms of foods, there the there's there's an infinite amount. I think a blueberry's got like 1,000 different molecules in it, and which ones are doing what, and they're interacting with each other. Um, and then certainly for fragrances, people that are working on flowers, there's how many different smells are there in the world? There's like a million different smells. And uh, another thing that interests me is the rootstocks. And many crops like citrus, rootstock is a big business there. And in peaches, it's big business there. I mean, it's really important. What are the rootstocks? And in blueberries, they've been always pretty easy to root from cutting. So you just stick a cutting and you can sell the plant for like 50 cents a line, or you totally 50 cents a plant. But why have we not used the problem with rooting cuttings with a crop is that the breeder has to breed for a good root system and a good fruit at the same time. Now, if you've got a rootstock breeder and you got a scion breeder, you can divide the problems. You only got to have 20 good things about the berry and only 20 other good things about the root, right? And so you multiply that together, that's like 400 trillion million billion things you've got to get in the same plant. But if you can divide it in half, it cuts it down by like 10 orders of magnitude, how many different things you have to breed for. So we never, all my breeding career, we never released a variety that was the best tasting that we could have released. And we never released the variety that grew the best. And grafting blueberries is going to happen. Like I would say, like 50 years from now, every blueberry will be grafted. That's my theory. And then other crops, like a lot of the vegetable people have been grafting watermelons onto gourds and tomatoes onto eggplants and things like that. But there's still some crops in which that's an open slate yet. It hasn't been done yet. Otherwise, this process recurrent selection that I talked about at first, in which you grow a very large number of genetically variable plants, and you pick out maybe 100 of them that you like, that have the most like what is the best. Use those as parents and grow like 10,000 seedlings, pick out the 100 that are the best. From those, you use them as parents, you grow 10,000 seedlings, pick out the 100 the best. After like 7 generations with blueberries, we have increased the berry size, not me, but everybody who breeds blueberries increase the berry size. The biggest you'll ever find in the woods is 0.5 gram on a well-loaded bush. And even if you plant it and you fertilize it, you water it, you keep all the weeds away, 0.5 gram. Now they're like 3 and 4 grams apiece. And that's after 7 generations, and the progress is not slowed down at all. There's like just as much variation at the 3 and 4 gram level as there ever was back in the 0.5 gram level. So blueberries, if you wanted to, you can. I was picking muscadine grapes the other day from our arbor, and like I was amazed, and like in 10 minutes, I had more grapes than I was going to be able to give away to all my neighbors. To do with that with blueberries, when I'm giving away blueberries, I'd say, man, that's got to be a pretty good neighbor because it takes forever to pick those things, even if they're big ones. But they're so not that all blueberries need to be big, but the ones that are 4 grams now, they could be 12 grams. I don't have any doubt about it. So the process of recurrent selection is amazing and an amazing tool, even though it's not used by many people now. They've got more gee whiz ways of getting new varieties, but most recurrent selection is it's an open book. It's like we just we just started on this blueberry breeding business. That's what I feel. If I had another 100 years to do it, I could amaze the world. Well, that's exciting about the future. Oh, what else is exciting about the future? So those are just a few things, but let me just state a few things that worry me, if that's okay.
Of course.
There's the big things. There's the nuclear war thing, the environmental degradation thing, in which, uh, like, the wilderness of the world is being destroyed. The invasive plants are a huge problem. Plants are like disappearing out of the forests in Florida because of introduced vines and things that are destroying. Um, that's a big worry. One of my worries as a breeder, and I don't know if this is valid or not, but it seems to me that there aren't many people that grew up on little farms anymore. And most of what I know about plants, I learned before I was in 10th grade by growing vegetables and by being around farmers. And it just, I mean, you learn how to break up concrete with a sledgehammer, and you learn how to like catch chickens in oak trees at night and shoot chicken hawks. And there's a million things you learn by being on a farm. And I mean, who's on a farm anymore? I mean, the children are not raised on a farm. They're not raised in a wild environment. And that I think there's not, it's a real handicap for a lot of things. Uh, Climate change is major. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's going to happen with that. It's the anti-scientific attitude of politicians and people. I've decided that I'm getting worse and worse the older I get. I think people are basically stupid, and I think that civilization is an anomaly rather than the rule. And like things are very fragile, and everything seems to go on. Like the last 100 years, we've had it good in this country. We've been like pumping the water tables down lower and lower. We've been clearing up the forest. We've been using really good topsoil in many parts, and the gullies have been getting bigger and bigger, and the more pests have come in, and it's like worrisome, I think, the long-term future. And I know that a lot of the people that when I got out of graduate school in 74, it was like kind of pre-Borlaug days. Uh, there were a lot of people. Lester Brown, I used to read him all the time. He was like, and Paul Ehrlich, the end is near, is what they were saying. And like 50 years later, the end hasn't happened yet. And so uh, the population had been increasing like maybe 2% a year, but food production had been increasing 3% a year. So instead of famine and starvation, we've got like excess food. But I think that it's despite not despite the tremendous advances we've had in agriculture and other things, I think the end, I'm just like those guys 50 years ago. I think the end is near. I think when you're approaching a cliff at 100 miles an hour with your car, and it's perfectly smooth, there is a point, there's a waterfall there, and at some point we're going to reach that, what the break point, and it's going to crash, I think. That worries me a good bit. Uh, but we'll see if it happens or not. But anyway, to end on a gloomy note, that's it.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your
Mhm.
insight, your experiences, your wisdom, the amazing advice that you shared with us for the young folks coming up and stepping into roles to help make a difference. And just thank you for the amazing contributions that you've had to the field of horticulture and to the American Society for Hort Science as well. So thank you, Paul.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'll just say that a chance plays a good part in everything. And what appears might appear to be a great contributions of me was largely being in the right place at the right time with the right crop and being a hard worker and having been raised on a farm.
Well said. Thank you,
Okay,
Paul.
see you. Thanks for your work here.
Thank you.